Hi everyone, Classics Week is over now. Here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a classic review of the Avalanches album Since I Left You. This is the legendary and groundbreaking debut album from the ever-evolving Australian music outfit known as the Avalanches. Originally completed in the year 2000, the creation and eventual viral spread of Since I Left You was a long and winding process, which involved lineup changes, sample clearances, and slowly growing critical acclaim. The Avalanches' musical journey and evolution is far from over, but for a while it seemed like it was, as Since I Left You remained to be the group's only album until the eventual follow-up Wildflower 16 years later, which was then preceded by We Will Always Love You in 2020. And while the group hasn't completely abandoned their plunderphonic roots, it is clear in recent years they have been focusing more on psychedelic pop aesthetics, original material, guest features, and clearly have no desire to just recreate what they did on this record. I mean, I don't even think they could if they wanted to, as it was such a long time ago. One of the key founders of the group has since left, not to mention the financial risks and legal holdups involved in dropping a record that has hundreds, if not thousands, of samples laced into it. So the Avalanches are a pretty different band at this point, but at the time of this record's creation, they consisted of founding members Robbie Chatter, Darren Seltman, Tony DeBlasi, and Gordon McQuilton, and additionally Dexter Fabe and James De La Cruz. The Avalanches also built up to the release of this album with their 1997 El Producto EP, which had its fair share of samples on it, but was mostly an experimental hip-hop release that had a lot of Beastie Boys influence on it. In contrast, Since I Left You is more of an instrumental experience, so long as you count its various vocal chops as a larger sonic tapestry being woven here, as it's pretty clear all the source material here is being manipulated and flipped around to create something wholly unique, and a wildly different experience, which is what makes Since I Left You so amazing. Because in the years since its release, this thing remains to be the gold standard for sample-based dance music, as the tracks on this record hit a level of detail and nuance, dynamics, and style that most stuff in this lane just doesn't have. Even prior classics such as DJ Shadow's Introducing, which I have also reviewed, and even a lot of newer records that have the advantage of being made with more advanced technology than what was available in 1999. It took years, but Since I Left You brought modern music to the fullest and most artful realization of what early hip-hop producers like Steinsky were doing in the early 80s. Because the tracks on this thing aren't just groovy and fun, there's a kaleidoscopic majesty to them that is pretty striking right from the opening track, with its refined string samples, woodwinds, and youthful vocal chops. The way all these sounds bleed together over these distant disco rhythms, I don't know if what I'm listening to is from a dance floor or a dream. From here we have a seamless transition into the following Stay Another Season. If you listen to this LP, you will find there is kind of a continuous flow moving from track to track to track, so there is like a holistic momentum to the entire record, which most definitely adds to the magic. I also love how the groove changes on this track into something ritzier and more funk-based, but still quite a few familiar instrumental elements from the previous track remain, and take on a slightly different shape. There's a gradual progression to this track too, and many of these, little shifts and nuances in groove and detail over the course of this album are consistently impressive. The way certain samples are applied on this record too, for example, there's this one squealing tone that sticks out pretty boldly in the mix, one that doesn't sound too much unlike what production crews such as Public Enemy's The Bomb Squad would do back in the day, grabbing like a wild chunk of saxophone, just screaming out and throwing that into an already cluttered mix. The Avalanches are scratching a very similar itch here, but the sound they're using, in this case, sounds like a horse very aggressively neighing. But unless you're really listening to it and thinking of it in that way, it might just fly by you as just another piece of instrumentation. The plunderphonic magic of this album continues onto the song Radio, whose very fuzzy and static-laced grooves sound like competing AM frequencies, creating a very great but very unlikely dance mix. Then the zany collage intro on the following 2 Hearts and 3/4 Time eventually settles into one of the most relaxing and beautiful grooves on the entire record. And obviously it's in 3/4-2, which is something that you don't often hear in a lot of plunderphonic and hip-hop based, instrumental music. But between all the swirling electronic keyboards and syrupy effects, it's pretty clear that the Avalanches are going for something here that's much more trippy and sweet. Just for contrast, the following Avalanche rock interlude Interlude has one of the chunkiest rap beats on the entire record, plus a pretty prominent Raekwon vocal sample, which flows flawlessly into the ever-tense electro grooves that sound like a huge throwback on the next track, Flight to Night, which evolves across its 4-minute runtime with such grandiosity, it feels like I am experiencing some kind of mind-expanding acid trip. Meanwhile, Close to You has so many varied passages within it, it feels like 4 songs within one, with a lot of hypnotic and gentle fiddle licks, as well as these really hard-hitting group choruses that sound like something straight out of a roller disco. In fact, I kind of wonder how this record would play over the sound system from front to back at a roller disco, especially given how hard the cyclical grooves hit on the track Different Feeling, which feels like a more pillowy and sweet version of something you would hear from Daft Punk's Homework era, which it's crazy to think this thing dropped around the same time as their album Discovery, because given the quality of artistry and detail that Avalanches laced into this project, it feels like something that could have easily been dropped 5 or 6 years after the fact. The song toward the end of the record, Live at Domino's, sounds pretty Daft Punk inspired as well. The track list from here continues to sound like the most amazing, surreal, and exciting DJ set ever. The operatic intro vocals on Electricity flow whimsically into more disco rhythms, underscored by some amazing slap bass licks as well as robotic sound effects. Then the track Tonight is a gorgeous and serene little piano section that guides the record into a somewhat ambient passage, just before we hit one of the biggest bops on the entire LP, Frontier Psychiatrist, with its huge horn hits, heavy beat, and epic DJ scratches. This is handily one of the funniest and most colorful moments on the entire LP. That boy needs therapy. I'm gonna kill you. Rarely is something so impressively epic, but also just downright silly at the same time. Then Ito's combination of woodwinds, acoustic guitars, driving grooves, as well as robotic vocal hits make for a mix of elements that are rigid but then also fluid that's kind of unique. While the beautiful Summer Crane and Little Journey continue to expand the more ambient, spacious, and experimental side of the record. The closing track, Extra Kings, I see as a perfect finish to this album and definitely shows that the band was looking at this project very holistically, because this one feels like the soundtrack to whatever alien race created this album saying goodbye and soaring away on their spaceship. Probably the best way I could describe this track. But yeah, that is this fun, groovy, danceable, colorful, and unique classic-ass album. It's amazing and most definitely worth your time, even if you've heard it before. And yeah, that's how I feel about it. Let me know what you think about this one in the comments, of course, and you're the best. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, the Avalanches of Forever.